Not all pirate flags were the same. In fact, every pirate ship had its own version, a personal brand of terror. Welcome back to the channel, where we uncover the hidden stories behind history's most fascinating mysteries. Today, we're diving into one of the most iconic symbols in maritime history, the pirate flag. But here's what most people don't realize. The classic skull-and-crossbones wasn't a universal symbol that all pirates used. It was actually a highly personalized signature, as unique as a fingerprint, designed to strike fear into the hearts of anyone who saw it on the horizon. Picture this. You're a merchant sailor in 1720, scanning the Caribbean waters for any sign of danger. Suddenly, you spot black sails in the distance. Your heart starts racing, but it's not until you see the flag that true terror sets in. Is it Blackbeard's skeleton holding an hourglass and a spear? That means you might live if you surrender quickly. Time is running out, but there's still hope. Or is it Edward Lowe's bleeding red heart? In that case, you might as well start praying, because mercy isn't coming. The diversity of pirate flags wasn't just artistic expression or random design choices, it was a sophisticated system of psychological warfare, personal branding, and maritime communication that operated on multiple levels simultaneously. These weren't just symbols. They were weapons of terror, tools of reputation, management, and declarations of independence, all rolled into one piece of cloth. What did these unique flags mean, and why did pirates customize their symbols of fear? The answer reveals a complex world of maritime politics, psychological manipulation, and personal identity that goes far deeper than most people imagine. These flags weren't just decorations. They were carefully crafted instruments of power that could determine whether a pirate crew would face a bloody battle or an easy surrender, whether they would be feared across the seven seas or forgotten as minor threats. To understand why every pirate ship needed its own distinctive flag, we need to first grasp the fundamental role that reputation played in the pirate world. Unlike legitimate naval forces, which derived their authority from the power of established governments, pirates had to create their own authority from scratch. They were essentially independent contractors in the business of maritime violence, and their success depended entirely on their ability to convince their targets that resistance was futile. This created a unique economic incentive for pirates to develop recognizable personal brands. A pirate captain whose flag was known and feared across the Caribbean could capture ships without firing a single shot. Merchant crews would take one look at that distinctive symbol flying from the approaching ship's mast and immediately haul down their colors in surrender. This wasn't cowardice. It was rational calculation. Why fight a battle you were almost certain to lose, especially when surrender might mean you'd live to sail another day? The flag became each captain's personal trademark, their signature in the deadly business of piracy. Just as modern corporations spend millions developing brand recognition, pirate captains understood that a memorable, terrifying flag design could be worth its weight in gold. The more infamous their flag became, the easier their job became. Fear was their most valuable asset, and the flag was how they broadcast that fear across the vast expanse of the ocean. But the flag system served purposes beyond simple terror tactics. In the complex ecosystem of Caribbean piracy, where dozens of independent crews operated simultaneously, flags also functioned as a sophisticated identification system. Pirates needed to be able to distinguish friend from foe at great distances, often in poor weather conditions or the uncertain light of dawn and dusk. A distinctive flag allowed Allied crews to recognize each other across miles of open ocean. It prevented costly mistakes where friendly pirate ships might attack each other, thinking they were targeting legitimate merchant vessels. It also enabled complex operations where multiple pirate crews might coordinate their attacks, using their flags to communicate their intentions and positions to their allies. The flag also served as a crucial element in the intricate politics of pirate society. Just as medieval nobles displayed their heraldic arms to establish their identity and status, pirate captains used their flags to assert their place in the informal hierarchy of Caribbean piracy. A captain flying a particularly elaborate or terrifying flag was making a statement about his ambitions, his capabilities, and his willingness to back up his threats with action. This system of personal flags created a kind of maritime theatre, where each captain was both performer and playwright in an ongoing drama of fear and reputation. The most successful pirates understood that they weren't just sea robbers. They were impresarios of terror, carefully crafting their image to maximize their psychological impact on their victims. The psychology behind these personal flags was remarkably sophisticated. Pirates intuitively understood principles of behavioral psychology that wouldn't be formally codified for centuries. They knew that humans are wired to respond to certain visual symbols with immediate fear responses. Skulls, skeletons, blood, weapons, and hourglasses all tap into primal anxieties about death, violence, and the passage of time. But pirates went beyond just using generically scary imagery. The best pirate flags told specific stories, conveyed particular messages, and created unique emotional responses. A flag showing a skeleton toasting with a live man might suggest that death was something to be celebrated rather than feared. A flag depicting a pirate captain standing triumphantly over a skull might imply that this particular captain had conquered death itself. These subtle variations in symbolism allowed each captain to craft a distinct psychological profile that would have maximum impact on his intended victims. The effectiveness of this psychological warfare cannot be overstated. Historical records are filled with accounts of merchant ships surrendering immediately upon seeing particular pirate flags, without any shots being fired or any violence threatened. The flag alone was enough to convince entire crews that resistance was hopeless. This saved pirates' ammunition, reduced the risk of casualties among their own crews, and preserved the value of captured ships and cargo. The personal flag also served as a form of maritime contract. In the complex world of 18th-century piracy, different captains had different reputations for how they treated prisoners, whether they honored agreements, and what terms they might offer for surrender. A merchant captain who recognized an approaching pirate flag could make informed decisions about whether to fight, flee, or surrender based on what he knew about that particular captain's track record. Some pirate flags became associated with relatively merciful treatment of prisoners. Captains who flew these flags might find merchant ships more willing to surrender, knowing they were likely to survive the encounter. Other flags became synonymous with brutality and massacre, creating such intense fear that some merchant crews preferred to fight hopeless battles rather than face whatever horrors awaited them if they were captured. This brings us to the most famous and fearsome pirate flags in history, each one a masterpiece of psychological manipulation and personal branding. These were unjust pieces of cloth. They were carefully designed instruments of terror that could paralyze entire crews with fear. Edward Teach, known to history as Blackbeard, understood the power of psychological warfare better than perhaps any pirate in history. His flag featured a skeleton holding an hourglass in one hand and a spear or dart in the other, all set against a black background that made the white bones seem to glow with supernatural menace. But this wasn't just random scary imagery. Every element of the design carried a specific, calculated message. The skeleton represented death itself, not just the possibility of dying, but the inevitable fate that awaited all mortals. But this wasn't a passive representation of mortality. This skeleton was actively engaged with the world of the living, holding tools and weapons, suggesting that death wasn't just waiting patiently for people to die, it was actively hunting them. The hourglass was perhaps the most psychologically powerful element of Blackbeard's flag. Time was running out. But for whom? For the merchant sailors who saw the flag approaching, for Blackbeard's victims, whose lives were measured in the few remaining grains of sand. The ambiguity was intentional and terrifying. The hourglass suggested both urgency and inevitability. Time was running out, decisions had to be made quickly, and delay would only make the situation worse. The spear or dart in the skeleton's other hand added an element of active threat to the passive menace of the hourglass. This wasn't just death as a natural process. This was death as a weapon, deliberately wielded by forces beyond human control. The skeleton wasn't just announcing that people would die eventually. It was actively threatening to kill them, right now. Blackbeard's personal style amplified the psychological impact of his flag. He was known to weave hemp and slow matches into his enormous black beard and light them during battles, surrounding his head with smoke and flickering flames that made him look like a demon emerging from hell. When merchant sailors saw Blackbeard's flag approaching and then caught sight of the man himself, wreathed in smoke and flame, the psychological effect was devastating. The combination of the flag's imagery with Blackbeard's theatrical presentation created a reputation that preceded him throughout the Caribbean. Ships would surrender to Blackbeard's flag before his vessel even came within cannon range. The psychological warfare was so effective that Blackbeard often captured multiple ships in a single day, without firing a shot or suffering a single casualty. But Blackbeard's approach to flag design influenced other pirates as well. The concept of combining multiple symbolic elements to create complex psychological messages became a standard technique among the most successful pirate captains. The flag became a kind of visual vocabulary that allowed pirates to communicate sophisticated threats and promises across the ocean. John Rackham, better known as Calico Jack, took a completely different approach to flag design that proved equally effective in its own way. While Blackbeard's flag was complex and layered with multiple meanings, Calico Jack's flag was elegantly simple. A skull with two crossed cutlasses beneath it, all in white on a black background. This simplicity was deliberate and powerful. Where Blackbeard's flag required interpretation and contemplation, Calico Jack's flag delivered its message instantly and unmistakably. Skull equals death. Crossed swords equal violence. The combination meant violent death, delivered by men who specialized in killing with bladed weapons. The choice of cutlasses rather than pistols or cannons was also significant. Cutlasses were personal weapons, used in hand-to-hand combat. They suggested that death wouldn't come from a distant cannon shot or a quick bullet, but from close, personal violence. The wielder of a cutlass had to be close enough to see his victim's face, to hear his last words, to watch the life drain from his eyes. Calico Jack's flag became one of the most recognizable pirate symbols in history, and its influence can still be seen in popular culture today. The crossed swords design has been adopted by countless movies, books, video games, and other media representations of piracy. It's become the archetypal pirate flag in the public imagination, even though it was originally just one captain's personal brand. The effectiveness of Calico Jack's flag design lay not just in its simplicity, but in its memorability. Merchant sailors who encountered it once would never forget it. The stark, bold imagery burned itself into their memories, creating lasting associations between that particular flag and the experience of being captured by pirates. This psychological conditioning meant that future encounters with the flag would trigger immediate fear responses, even before any actual threat materialized. Calico Jack's flag also demonstrated how effective minimalist design could be in psychological warfare. By stripping away unnecessary details and focusing on the most essential symbolic elements, he created an image that communicated its message instantly and viscerally. There was no time delay while viewers puzzled out the meaning. The threat was immediate and unmistakable. The success of this design approach influenced many other pirates, who began experimenting with their own variations on the skull-and-crossed weapons theme. But while many imitated the basic concept, none achieved quite the same combination of simplicity, memorability, and psychological impact that made Calico Jack's flag legendary. Bartholomew Roberts, known as Black Bart, created not one, but several different flag designs during his remarkably successful pirate career. This itself was a renovation in pirate flag psychology. Rather than being locked into a single design, Roberts understood that different situations might call for different messages, and he crafted multiple flags to serve different strategic purposes. Roberts' most famous flag showed him standing on two skulls, labeled ABH and AMH, a Barbadian S-head and a Martinican S-head. This flag was personal, specific, and intensely threatening. It wasn't just a generic threat of violence. It was an explicit declaration of war against the governments of Barbados and Martinique, whose naval forces had been particularly aggressive in hunting down pirates. The imagery of Roberts standing triumphantly on the skulls of his enemies conveyed several powerful messages simultaneously. First, it established Roberts as a conqueror of death itself. He was unjust, threatening to kill his enemies. He was showing that he had already done so and was literally standing on their remains. Second, it demonstrated his complete contempt for colonial authority. He wasn't hiding from the government forces hunting him. He was openly mocking them and displaying trophies of his victories over them. The personal nature of the threats made this flag particularly terrifying to sailors from Barbados and Martinique. They were unjust facing a generic pirate threat. They were facing a man who had specifically targeted their homelands for destruction. The flag suggested that Roberts saw his conflict with these colonies as a personal vendetta that could only end with the complete destruction of his enemies. Roberts' second major flag design showed him standing beside a skeleton, both figures holding a cup as if toasting each other. This image conveyed a completely different but equally disturbing message. Where his first flag showed Roberts as a conqueror of death, his second flag showed him as death's companion and partner. The toast imagery was particularly unsettling, because it suggested celebration and camaraderie between Roberts and the forces of death. They weren't enemies or even strangers. They were drinking companions, perhaps celebrating their joint successes in spreading terror across the Caribbean. This flag implied that Roberts didn't fear death, because he had made death his ally and friend. The psychological sophistication of Roberts' flag designs reflected his exceptional intelligence and strategic thinking. Roberts was one of the most successful pirates in history, capturing over 400 ships during his relatively brief career. His success wasn't just due to his seamanship or fighting ability. It was largely the result of his understanding of psychological warfare and his ability to craft messages that would maximize his enemy's fear while minimizing actual violence. Roberts' use of multiple flags also demonstrated an understanding of audience psychology that was centuries ahead of its time. He recognized that different groups of people would respond to different types of threats and imagery. Government officials might be intimidated by his explicit declarations of war, while ordinary sailors might be more frightened by his apparent partnership with supernatural forces. This flexibility in messaging allowed Roberts to tailor his psychological approach to specific situations and targets. When attacking government vessels, he might fly his explicitly political flag to maximize the psychological pressure on official crews. When targeting merchant ships, he might choose his more supernatural imagery to create generalized terror that would encourage quick surrender. Edward Lowe took pirate flag psychology in yet another direction, creating one of the most viscerally disturbing images in the entire history of maritime warfare. Lowe's flag featured a red skeleton on a black background, but the most horrifying element was the addition of a bleeding red heart pierced by a spear or arrow. The choice of red rather than white for the skeleton was itself a psychological masterstroke. White skeletons, while threatening, still maintained some distance from reality. They were clearly symbols rather than literal representations. But red skeletons suggested freshly spilled blood, recent violence, bones still stained with the gore of recent killings. The bleeding heart was an even more powerful psychological weapon. Hearts are universally associated with life, love, compassion, and mercy. By showing a heart pierced and bleeding, Lowe was making an explicit statement that these human qualities had no place in his world. The flag announced that anyone who encountered Lowe should expect no mercy, no compassion, no recognition of their common humanity. The combination of the bloody skeleton and the pierced heart created one of the most emotionally devastating pirate flags ever designed. It didn't just threaten death, it promised cruel death, death without mercy. Death inflicted by someone who had deliberately rejected every impulse toward human decency and compassion. Lowe's reputation matched the horror of his flag. He was known throughout the Caribbean as one of the most sadistically cruel pirates of his era. A man who seemed to take genuine pleasure in inflicting suffering on his victims. Stories of his brutality spread throughout the maritime community, creating a feedback loop where his reputation amplified the psychological impact of his flag and his flag reinforced his reputation for cruelty. Merchant sailors who recognized Lowe's flag approaching knew they were facing not just the possibility of death, but the probability of torture, mutilation, and prolonged suffering before they were finally allowed to die. This knowledge created such intense psychological pressure that some merchant crews reportedly threw themselves overboard rather than face capture by Lowe's crew. The effectiveness of Lowe's psychological warfare was so extreme that it sometimes backfired on him. Ships that might have surrendered to other pirates chose to fight hopeless battles rather than submit to Lowe's tender mercies. This meant that Lowe's crew faced more combat and higher casualties than pirates, who had developed reputations for more merciful treatment of prisoners. But for Lowe, this may have been an acceptable trade-off. His flag and reputation served purposes beyond mere practical piracy. They established him as a figure of pure malevolence in the popular imagination, a bogeyman whose very name could frighten children and whose flag could empty harbors. In the attention-driven economy of pirate reputation, Lowe's extreme approach made him one of the most famous and feared pirates of his generation. Christopher Moody created what many historians consider the most psychologically sophisticated pirate flag of all time. Moody's flag was red rather than black, immediately distinguishing it from most other pirate banners. The red background traditionally signified no quarter, meaning no mercy would be shown to those who resisted. On this blood-red field, Moody placed a skull, an hourglass, a heart, and a cutlass. creating a complex symbolic narrative that functioned almost like a visual poem about death and time. Each element reinforced and amplified the others, creating layers of meaning that worked on both conscious and unconscious levels. The skull, as always, represented death, but placed against the red background, it suggested violent death specifically. The hourglass added the element of limited time. Decisions had to be made quickly, before the sand ran out. The heart, unlike Lowe's bleeding heart, appeared intact but was positioned in a way that suggested it too was under threat from the surrounding symbols of death and violence. The cutlass completed the narrative, providing the means by which the threatened violence would be carried out. But Moody's cutlass wasn't crossed with another weapon. As in Calico Jack's design, it stood alone, suggesting the solitary, inevitable nature of the death it would deliver. The overall composition created a kind of memento mori, a reminder of death that was common in medieval and Renaissance art. But where traditional memento mori were meant to encourage contemplation of mortality and the need for spiritual preparation, Moody's flag used the same symbolic vocabulary to create immediate terror and urgency. The red background added another layer of psychological pressure. Red is universally associated with blood, violence, anger, and danger. It's a color that triggers immediate physiological responses: increased heart rate, heightened alertness, and the release of stress hormones. By using red instead of the more common black background, Moody ensured that his flag would create immediate physical discomfort in anyone who saw it. Moody's flag also demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of cultural symbolism. The combination of Christian imagery, the heart, often associated with the Sacred Heart of Jesus, with symbols of death and violence, created a blasphemous image that would have been particularly disturbing to the deeply religious sailors of the 18th century. This religious dimension added another layer of psychological pressure. Sailors weren't just facing the prospect of physical death. They were confronting what appeared to be a satanic inversion of Christian symbols, suggesting that their souls as well as their bodies were in danger. The psychological impact of these personalized flags extended far beyond their immediate effectiveness in terrorizing victims. They created a kind of psychological arms race among pirate captains, each trying to develop increasingly sophisticated and terrifying designs that would give them an edge over their competitors. This competition drove remarkable innovations in the psychology of fear and intimidation. Pirates began experimenting with color psychology, symbolic narratives, cultural references, and even optical illusions to maximize the impact of their flags. They became inadvertent pioneers in what we would now recognize as psychological warfare and visual communication. The diversity of flag designs also created a complex system of maritime communication that functioned across the entire Caribbean. Experienced sailors could read pirate flags like a kind of visual language, instantly identifying not just that pirates were approaching, but which specific pirate captain they were dealing with, and what that might mean for their chances of survival. This system was so effective that merchant captains began keeping detailed records of different pirate flags and their associated captains, creating informal intelligence networks that helped them make informed decisions about when to fight, when to flee, and when to surrender. These records became valuable resources that were shared among merchant crews throughout the Caribbean. The psychological warfare aspect of pirate flags also had strategic implications for how pirates organized their operations. Captains with particularly fearsome reputations could often operate with smaller crews, since their flags did much of the work of intimidation that might otherwise require large numbers of armed men. This efficiency in psychological intimidation allowed successful pirate captains to maximize their profits while minimizing their risks. Smaller crews meant larger individual shares of captured treasure, reduced supply requirements, and greater operational flexibility. The most successful pirates understood that fear was often more valuable than firepower. The personalized nature of pirate flags also created opportunities for deception and misdirection. Some pirates carried multiple flags and would choose which one to fly based on their strategic needs in particular situations. A captain might fly a relatively benign flag when approaching a heavily armed target, then switch to his most terrifying banner once combat began. Others engaged in outright impersonation, flying copies of famous pirates' flags to benefit from their established reputations. This practice created its own psychological dynamics, as the real owners of stolen flag designs had to work even harder to maintain their reputations and distinguish themselves from imitators. The flag system also created interesting dynamics within pirate crews themselves. The flag represented not just the captain's personal brand, but the collective identity of the entire crew. Crew members took pride in sailing under flags that were feared and respected throughout the Caribbean. The flag became a symbol of their professional competence and their place in the informal hierarchy of pirate society. Some crews became so attached to their flags that they would continue flying them, even after their original captain was killed or retired. This created a kind of institutional continuity that transcended individual leadership. Similar to how military units maintain their colors and traditions across changes in command. The psychological impact of pirate flags was so powerful that it influenced legitimate naval forces as well. Some naval commanders began designing more intimidating flags for their own vessels, hoping to capture some of the psychological advantages that pirates had developed. However, these attempts were generally less successful because legitimate naval forces were constrained by official regulations and diplomatic considerations that limited their ability to create truly terrifying imagery. Pirates, operating outside the bounds of civilized society, had no such constraints. They could create flags that would have been considered blasphemous, treasonous, or simply too disturbing for legitimate forces to display. This freedom to explore the darker aspects of human psychology gave pirates significant advantages in the realm of psychological warfare. The effectiveness of pirate flag psychology also had economic implications for maritime trade throughout the Caribbean. Insurance rates for merchant vessels increased dramatically in waters where particularly feared pirate flags had been sighted. Some merchant companies refused to send ships to areas where certain pirates were known to operate, creating de facto exclusion zones around the most psychologically effective pirate captains. These economic effects created feedback loops that further amplified the power of successful pirate flags. As insurance rates increased and trade routes shifted, the mere presence of a feared pirate flag in an area could cause economic disruption far beyond any actual piracy that took place. The flag itself became a weapon of economic warfare. The contrast between pirate flags and the official banners of legitimate naval forces reveals fundamental differences in how these two types of maritime organizations understood power and authority. National flags represented the abstract authority of distant governments. They were symbols of institutional power that existed independent of the particular individuals who served under them. Pirate flags, by contrast, were intensely personal symbols that were inseparable from the individuals who created them. They represented not institutional authority but personal charisma, individual reputation, and the ability to inspire fear through force of personality. In many ways, pirate flags were more similar to medieval heraldry than to modern national symbols. This personalization of authority was both a strength and a weakness for pirate organizations. On one hand, it allowed charismatic leaders to create powerful personal brands that could intimidate enemies and inspire loyalty among followers. On the other hand, it made pirate organizations vulnerable to disruption when their leaders were killed or captured, since their authority was tied to specific individuals rather than institutional structures. The success of personalized pirate flags also reflected broader cultural trends in the 18th century. This was an era when individual reputation and personal honor carried enormous weight in social and economic relationships. Pirates were simply applying these cultural values to the realm of maritime warfare, using personalized symbols to build the kind of reputation-based authority that was common in other areas of society. The psychological sophistication of pirate flag design has had lasting influence on military and political symbolism. Modern special forces units, revolutionary movements, and insurgent organizations continue to use many of the same psychological principles that pirates pioneered in their flag designs. The use of death imagery, threatening symbolism, and personalized branding to create psychological advantage has become a standard technique in asymmetric warfare. From the Nazi SS to modern terrorist organizations, groups that lack conventional military power have consistently turned to psychological warfare techniques that were first perfected by Clubian pirates. The influence of pirate flags on popular culture has been even more pervasive. The skull-and-crossbones has become a universal symbol of rebellion, danger, and opposition to authority. It appears on everything from motorcycle club patches to punk rock album covers to computer hacker logos. The basic visual vocabulary developed by 18th century pirates continues to communicate messages about independence, danger, and resistance to mainstream authority. This cultural persistence reflects the enduring power of the psychological principles that pirates discovered through their flag designs. The human brain is still wired to respond to images of skulls, bones, and weapons with immediate fear responses. The symbols that terrified 18th century sailors continue to trigger similar reactions in modern viewers. The democratization of terror that pirate flags represented was also historically significant. Before the golden age of piracy, the ability to project fear and intimidation across great distances was largely monopolized by established governments and their official military forces. Pirates showed that small, independent groups could develop equally effective psychological weapons using nothing more than creative flag design and strategic reputation management. This democratization of psychological warfare had implications that extended far beyond piracy itself. It demonstrated that authority based on fear could be challenged and competed with by anyone with sufficient creativity and determination. The success of pirate flags helped establish precedents for how non-state actors could compete with established powers in the realm of psychological and symbolic warfare. The legacy of pirate flag psychology can also be seen in modern marketing and brand development. The principles that pirates used to create memorable, emotionally powerful flags are now standard techniques in corporate branding. The use of distinctive visual symbols, color, psychology, and emotional associations to create instant brand recognition follows directly from innovations first developed by pirate captains. Modern brands that successfully tap into rebellion, danger, or anti-establishment sentiment often draw directly or indirectly on the visual vocabulary first developed by pirate flags. Harley-Davidson motorcycles, energy drinks, extreme sports brands, and countless other products use skull imagery, crossed weapons, and similar symbolism to communicate messages about independence and resistance to authority. The effectiveness of these modern applications demonstrates that the psychological principles underlying pirate flag design remain as relevant today as they were 3 centuries ago. Human psychology has unchanged fundamentally since the 18th century. The same images and symbols that could terrify a merchant sailor in 1720 can still trigger powerful emotional responses in modern consumers. The study of pirate flags also provides insights into how symbolic systems develop and evolve within specific communities. The Pirates of the Caribbean created what was essentially a new visual language, with its own vocabulary, grammar, and rules for effective communication. This language allowed them to communicate complex messages about identity, threat, and intention across vast distances and cultural boundaries. The speed with which this visual language developed and spread throughout the pirate community demonstrates the power of practical necessity to drive cultural innovation. Pirates needed effective ways to communicate their intentions and establish their reputations, and they rapidly developed sophisticated symbolic systems to meet these needs. The influence of these symbolic innovations spread far beyond the pirate community itself. Merchant sailors, naval officers, colonial administrators, and civilian populations all became fluent in reading and interpreting pirate flag symbolism. The visual language created by pirates became a shared cultural resource that influenced art, literature, and popular culture throughout the Atlantic world. As we look back on the golden age of piracy, from our modern perspective, the sophistication of pirate flag psychology becomes even more apparent. These weren't just crude symbols designed to frighten superstitious sailors. They were carefully crafted tools of communication and psychological warfare that demonstrated remarkable understanding of human psychology, cultural symbolism, and strategic communication. The pirates who created these flags were operating at the cutting edge of what we would now recognize as psychological operations, brand development, and strategic communication. They understood principles about fear, memory, cultural symbolism, and mass psychology that wouldn't be formally codified by academic researchers for centuries. Their success in creating lasting, influential symbols demonstrates that effective communication doesn't require formal education or institutional resources. The most memorable and influential symbols in human history have often come from individuals and groups operating outside established institutions, driven by practical necessity to find new ways to communicate their messages effectively. The diversity of pirate flag designs also reminds us that there is no single, universal approach to effective symbolic communication. Different symbols work for different audiences, in different contexts, and for different purposes. The most successful communicators, whether pirates or modern marketers, understand the importance of tailoring their messages to their specific audiences and objectives. The personal nature of pirate flags also highlights the importance of authenticity in symbolic communication. The most effective pirate flags weren't generic designs copied from others. They were authentic expressions of their creators' personalities, values, and strategic objectives. This authenticity was crucial to their psychological effectiveness, because it created a direct connection between the symbol and the person behind it. Modern attempts to recreate the psychological impact of pirate flags often fail, because they lack this authenticity. Corporate brands that try to appropriate pirate symbolism without understanding its deeper psychological foundations tend to create hollow imitations that lack the emotional power of the originals. The territorial nature of pirate flag psychology is also worth considering. Each captain's flag represented not just personal identity, but a kind of mobile territory, a space of authority that moved with the ship across the ocean. Unlike land-based rulers, whose authority was tied to fixed geographical boundaries, pirates created portable sovereignty that existed wherever their flags flew. This concept of mobile authority was revolutionary for its time and has had lasting influence on how we think about power, territory, and sovereignty. From modern naval operations to international business to digital communities, the idea that authority can be portable and independent of fixed geographical boundaries owes something to innovations first developed by pirate captains. The psychological effectiveness of pirate flags also demonstrates the power of narrative in human communication. The best pirate flags didn't just display threatening imagery, they told stories. Blackbeard's flag told the story of time running out under the threat of supernatural violence. Bartholomew Roberts' flags told stories of personal vengeance and partnership with death itself. These narrative elements made the flags more memorable and emotionally powerful than simple displays of weapons or skulls. The importance of narrative in effective communication remains as relevant today as it was in the 18th century. The most successful modern brands, political movements, and cultural phenomena are those that tell compelling stories, not just those that display attractive imagery or make logical arguments. Pirates understood this intuitively and created symbolic narratives that continue to resonate centuries later. The competitive nature of pirate flag design also drove continuous innovation and improvement. As different captains competed to create the most effective psychological weapons, they pushed the boundaries of what was possible with visual communication. This competition created a kind of evolutionary pressure that selected for increasingly sophisticated and effective designs. This competitive dynamic is still visible in modern symbolic communication. From corporate branding to political campaigning to social media marketing, the most effective communicators are those who continue to innovate and evolve their symbolic strategies in response to changing conditions and competitive pressures. The global reach of pirate flag symbolism is also remarkable. These symbols, created by relatively small groups of maritime outlaws, spread throughout the Atlantic world and eventually became globally recognized. This demonstrates the power of effective symbolic communication to transcend cultural and geographical boundaries. When it taps into universal aspects of human psychology, the fact that pirate flag imagery remains instantly recognizable and emotionally powerful across cultures and centuries suggests that pirates discovered something fundamental about human visual communication. They identified symbolic elements and compositional principles that connect directly to deep-seated psychological responses that are shared across human cultures. The democratic nature of pirate flag creation is also worth noting. Unlike official heraldry or national symbols, which were typically designed by established authorities according to formal rules and traditions, pirate flags could be created by anyone with the imagination and authority to do so. This democratic approach to symbol creation encouraged experimentation and innovation in ways that more formal systems could not. This democratization of symbolic authority has had lasting influence on how visual symbols are created and used in modern society. From grassroots political movements to internet memes to street art, the idea that anyone can create powerful, influential symbols owes something to the precedent established by pirate flag designers. The multimedia nature of pirate flag psychology is also significant. These flags didn't operate in isolation. They were part of comprehensive psychological warfare. Campaigns that included theatrical behavior, storytelling, reputation management, and strategic violence. The flags were the visual anchors for complex psychological strategies that worked across multiple channels of communication. Modern strategic communication has adopted similar multimedia approaches. Understanding that effective messaging requires coordination across multiple channels and media types, the integration of visual, narrative, and behavioral elements that pirates pioneered in their psychological warfare campaigns has become standard practice in everything from political campaigning to brand marketing to military psychological operations. The durability of pirate flag symbolism across centuries demonstrates the importance of creating symbols that connect to fundamental aspects of human psychology rather than temporary cultural trends. The pirates who created the most enduring and influential flags were unfollowing fashion. They were tapping into deep psychological patterns that remain constant across time and culture. This principle of connecting to fundamental psychological patterns rather than surface trends remains crucial for anyone seeking to create lasting symbolic impact. The most successful modern symbols, like the most successful pirate flags, work because they connect to basic human emotions and experiences that transcend specific cultural moments. To a king, a flag meant empire, a symbol of institutional authority backed by armies, navies, and the accumulated power of established governments. To a pirate, a flag meant something entirely different and in many ways more personal. It was fear made visible, a signature of death that carried the personal authority of the individual who created it. It was a weapon of war, a tool of psychological manipulation, and a work of art, all combined into a single piece of cloth. The pirate flags of the Golden Age represent one of history's most successful experiments in personalized psychological warfare. They show us that small groups of determined individuals operating outside established systems of authority can create symbols and communication strategies that rival or exceed those of major institutions. They demonstrate the power of authenticity, creativity, and deep psychological understanding to create lasting cultural impact. These flags remind us that effective communication isn't about following established rules or copying existing models. It's about understanding your audience, knowing your objectives, and having the courage to create something genuinely new and powerful. The pirates who created these symbols were pioneers in fields that wouldn't be formally recognized for centuries, and their innovations continue to influence how we think about power, authority, and communication. In our modern world of global communication and digital media, the lessons of pirate flag psychology remain remarkably relevant. Whether we're building brands, leading organizations, or simply trying to communicate effectively with others, we can learn from the pirates who understood that the right symbol deployed at the right moment could be worth more than any amount of conventional force. The legacy of personalized pirate flags extends into the most unexpected corners of modern culture. Military units around the world continue to design unofficial flags and patches that draw directly from pirate flag aesthetics. Special forces teams, submarine crews, and fighter squadrons create personalized symbols that use skulls, bones, and threatening imagery to build unit cohesion and intimidate opponents. Following templates established by Caribbean pirates centuries ago, the influence is equally visible in civilian contexts. Sports teams adopt pirate imagery to communicate aggression and fearlessness. The Pittsburgh Pirates, Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and Oakland Raiders all use variations of pirate symbolism to create psychological advantages over their opponents. Fans wear these symbols not just as expressions of team loyalty, but as participation in the psychological warfare that begins long before any actual competition takes place. Rock and roll culture embraced pirate flag aesthetics from its earliest days. recognizing the natural connection between pirate rebelliousness and musical rebellion against mainstream authority. From the Rolling Stones' skull-and-crossbones imagery to modern metal bands' elaborate death symbolism, musicians continue to use visual vocabularies first developed by pirate captains seeking to terrorize merchant sailors. The motorcycle club culture that emerged in post-World War II America drew heavily on pirate flag psychology, creating club patches and insignia that served many of the same functions as 18th-century pirate flags. These symbols identified club membership, established territorial claims, communicated threat levels, and built reputations that could intimidate rivals without requiring actual violence. Modern hacker culture has also adopted pirate flag symbolism, using skull-and-crossbones imagery to represent digital piracy and cyber rebellion against corporate and government authority. The visual connection between historical maritime piracy and modern digital piracy is unaccidental. Both represent forms of economic warfare conducted by small, independent groups against larger, institutional powers. The psychological principles underlying pirate flag design have found perhaps their most sophisticated modern application in the world of corporate branding and marketing. Companies like Hard Rock Cafe, Hot Topic, and countless energy drink manufacturers use skull imagery, crossed weapons, and rebellious symbolism to appeal to consumers who want to express their independence from mainstream culture. These modern applications work because they tap into the same psychological patterns that made pirate flags effective centuries ago. Human beings are still wired to respond to symbols of danger, rebellion, and death with heightened attention and emotional arousal. Marketers who understand these patterns can create brands that generate intense emotional responses and lasting customer loyalty. The personalization aspect of pirate flag psychology has also found new expression in the age of social media and personal branding. Individual entrepreneurs, influencers, and content creators craft personal visual identities that serve many of the same functions as pirate flags. They establish recognition, communicate personality, and differentiate their creators from competitors in crowded markets. The most successful personal brands often incorporate elements of danger, rebellion, or anti-establishment sentiment that echo pirate flag psychology. They understand that in a world saturated with generic corporate messaging, symbols that suggest authenticity, independence, and willingness to challenge authority can cut through the noise and create genuine emotional connections. Political movements throughout the modern era have also drawn on pirate flag psychology to create powerful symbols of resistance and rebellion. Revolutionary groups, independence movements, and anti-establishment organizations consistently use imagery borrowed from pirate flags to communicate their opposition to existing authority structures. The Gadsden flag's "Don't Tread on Me" message, various anarchist symbols, and countless revolutionary banners all employ psychological strategies first perfected by pirate captains. They use threatening imagery, personal symbolism, and carefully crafted emotional associations to build movements and intimidate opponents. The territorial aspects of pirate flag psychology have evolved into modern concepts of brand territory and market dominance. Just as pirate flags established zones of influence on the high seas, modern brands use consistent visual identity to claim psychological territory in consumer minds. The most successful brands create such strong associations between their symbols and their market categories that competitors struggle to establish alternative mental territories. This territorial psychology explains why trademark and brand protection have become so crucial in modern business. Companies understand that their visual symbols represent valuable psychological real estate, that must be defended against competitors who might try to appropriate similar imagery or create consumer confusion. The storytelling aspect of pirate flag design has also found new expression in modern media and entertainment. The most successful contemporary symbols don't just look impressive. They tell compelling stories that audiences can understand and remember. From superhero logos to sports team mascots to corporate brands, effective modern symbols combine visual impact with narrative coherence in ways that directly descend from pirate flag innovations. The psychological arms race that drove pirate flag evolution continues in modern competitive environments. As markets become more saturated and audiences become more sophisticated, communicators must develop increasingly creative and powerful symbols to capture attention and create emotional impact. This competitive pressure drives continuous innovation in visual communication, just as it did among Caribbean pirates. The international nature of modern communication has also amplified the importance of symbols that can transcend cultural and linguistic boundaries. Like pirate flags, which had to communicate effectively to diverse audiences across the Caribbean. Modern global brands must create symbols that work across different cultures, languages, and social contexts. The most successful global symbols often draw on the same universal psychological patterns that made pirate flags effective. Images of strength, danger, rebellion, and authenticity translate across cultural boundaries, because they connect to fundamental aspects of human psychology that remain constant across different societies. The speed of modern communication has created new opportunities and challenges for symbolic communication. Digital media allows symbols to spread globally in hours or minutes, creating possibilities for rapid reputation building that would have amazed 18th-century pirates. But this same speed also means that symbolic messages can be misinterpreted, appropriated, or undermined more quickly than ever before. Modern communicators must balance the authentic personalization that made pirate flags effective with the need for consistency and control in rapidly changing media environments. The most successful modern brands find ways to maintain authentic personality while adapting their symbolic strategies to new platforms and audience expectations. The democratization of symbol creation that began with pirate flags has reached unprecedented levels in the digital age. Anyone with basic design software can create and distribute symbols that potentially reach global audiences. This democratization has led to explosive creativity in visual communication. But it has also created challenges in standing out from increasingly crowded symbolic landscapes. The amateur creators who develop successful internet memes, viral marketing campaigns, and grassroots political symbols often succeed by applying psychological principles first discovered by pirate flag designers. They understand that authenticity, emotional impact, and narrative coherence matter more than professional polish or institutional backing. The measurement and analysis capabilities available to modern communicators would have astounded pirate captains, who had to judge the effectiveness of their flags based on immediate behavioral responses from their targets. Modern brands can track how their symbols perform across multiple channels, measure emotional responses in real time, and optimize their visual strategies based on comprehensive data analysis. Yet, despite these technological advances, the fundamental principles of effective symbolic communication remain remarkably consistent with those discovered by pirate flag designers. The symbols that create lasting impact are still those that combine authentic personality, emotional resonance, memorable imagery, and strategic deployment. The environmental context for modern symbolic communication has changed dramatically since the age of piracy, but the underlying human psychology that makes symbols effective remains constant. Whether displayed on a ship's mast in the Caribbean or on a smartphone screen in Tokyo, symbols succeed or fail based on their ability to trigger immediate emotional responses and create lasting memories. The global reach of modern communication has also created new possibilities for symbolic influence that would have been impossible in the 18th century. A symbol created today can potentially influence millions of people across multiple continents within hours of its first appearance. This amplification of symbolic power creates both tremendous opportunities and significant responsibilities for modern communicators. The ethical implications of symbolic manipulation have become increasingly important as our understanding of psychological influence has grown more sophisticated. The pirates who created terrorizing flags operated in a world where psychological warfare was considered a legitimate tool of survival. Modern communicators must navigate more complex ethical landscapes, while still creating symbols powerful enough to cut through information overload. The preservation and evolution of pirate flag symbolism in modern culture demonstrates the enduring power of authentic symbolic communication. These images continue to resonate, not because they are historically accurate representations of piracy, but because they embody timeless psychological patterns that remain relevant to contemporary audiences. The romanticization of pirate symbols in popular culture has created interesting tensions between their historical reality and their modern meanings. Contemporary uses of pirate imagery often emphasize freedom, adventure, and rebellion against authority, while downplaying the violence and criminality that were central to historical piracy. This selective appropriation shows how symbols can evolve to serve new purposes. While maintaining their psychological effectiveness, the educational value of studying pirate flag psychology extends beyond its applications to marketing and communication. These flags represent a masterclass in applied psychology, demonstrating how small groups with limited resources can compete effectively against larger, more powerful institutions through superior understanding of human motivation and behavior. The interdisciplinary nature of pirate flag psychology makes it valuable for students of history, psychology, art, communication, marketing, and military strategy. It provides concrete examples of how theoretical principles translate into practical applications, and how innovation often emerges from necessity rather than formal research and development. The cultural persistence of pirate flag imagery also raises questions about how societies process and remember historical trauma. The transformation of symbols associated with violence and terror into icons of rebellion and freedom reflects complex psychological and cultural processes that continue to shape how we understand our past and present. The technological possibilities for symbolic communication continue to evolve rapidly, creating new opportunities for applying pirate flag psychology in virtual reality, augmented reality, and other emerging media. The fundamental principles of creating authentic, emotionally powerful symbols remain relevant even as the platforms for displaying them become increasingly sophisticated. The international legal frameworks that govern modern symbolic communication would have been incomprehensible to 18th-century pirates, who operated outside any legal constraints on their psychological warfare campaigns. Modern communicators must balance effectiveness with compliance, creating symbols that are both powerful and legally defensible. The collaborative possibilities enabled by modern technology also create new variations on pirate flag psychology. Crowdsourced design, user-generated content, and participatory branding allow communities to collectively create symbols in ways that echo the democratic aspects of pirate society, while leveraging digital tools that amplify creative possibilities. The measurement of symbolic effectiveness has become both more sophisticated and more complex in the modern era. While pirates could judge the success of their flags by immediate behavioral responses, modern communicators must track effects across multiple channels, time periods, and audience segments to understand their symbolic impact fully. The competition for attention in modern media environments has intensified the importance of creating symbols that can break through information overload. Just as pirate flags had to communicate effectively to distracted, stressed sailors facing life-or-death decisions, modern symbols must capture attention from audiences bombarded with competing messages. The personalization technologies available today create new possibilities for adaptive, symbolic communication that goes beyond the static personalization of traditional pirate flags. Modern brands can customize their symbolic presentations for individual users, creating personalized psychological experiences that would have been impossible in any previous era. The speed of modern symbolic evolution means that contemporary communicators must balance the authenticity and consistency that made pirate flags effective with the agility required to adapt to rapidly changing cultural contexts. The most successful modern symbols maintain core psychological elements while evolving their surface expressions to remain relevant and engaging. As we look toward the future of symbolic communication, the lessons learned from pirate flag psychology remain remarkably relevant. The fundamental human needs for identity, recognition, and psychological impact that drove pirate flag creation continue to motivate modern communicators across all fields and industries. The pirates who created these powerful symbols showed us that effective communication isn't about having the biggest budget or the most advanced technology. It is about understanding human psychology, crafting authentic messages, and having the courage to create something genuinely distinctive and memorable. Their legacy reminds us that the most powerful symbols often come from the margins of society, created by people who have been forced to find innovative solutions to difficult problems. In our increasingly connected and competitive world, the ability to create authentic, emotionally powerful symbols remains as valuable as it was on the high seas of the Caribbean. The story of pirate flags teaches us that symbols aren't just decorative elements or optional additions to communication strategies. They are fundamental tools of human interaction that can determine success or failure in competitive environments. Whether you're building a brand, leading a team, or simply trying to express your identity, understanding the psychology behind effective symbolic communication can give you powerful advantages. The pirates who sailed under these personalized banners of terror and identity created more than just flags. They created a new language of power, fear, and authenticity that continues to influence how we communicate in the digital age. Their innovations in psychological warfare, personal branding, and symbolic storytelling remain relevant templates for anyone seeking to make their mark in an uncrowded and competitive world. If you found this deep dive into the psychology of pirate flags fascinating, you'll love our next exploration of maritime mystery and symbolism. Join me next time as we uncover the secret meanings behind pirate tattoos and body modifications, revealing how these permanent marks served as maps, memories, and messages in the dangerous world of 18th century piracy. We'll discover how pirates used their own bodies as canvases for psychological warfare, identity formation, and practical navigation, creating a hidden language of ink and scars that told stories of adventure, survival, and rebellion. Until then, Remember that the most powerful communication often comes not from following established rules, but from understanding human psychology and having the creativity to express authentic truth in memorable, impactful ways.